Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this video that I thought would be very particularly interesting to talk about. And this is going to be a video by the channel named Boxing Ego, who I like to review here and there. He'll bring up a certain amount of points that I find to be logical. He'll also bring up a certain amount of points that I find to be highly illogical or a little bit more delusional. But hey, it is what it is. All in all, I don't mind his channel. And I think that it's good to review someone like Boxing Ego because Ego is, he's kind of a guy that, in my opinion, can bring some positives and some negatives. Certainly more of a positive, in my view, than any of the other LDBC or new media channels, mainly that I see, at least mainly. Him and Blue Blood Sports TV, probably the two best LDBC and new media channels, in my personal view. And even to a degree, they still have a certain amount of bias and favoritism, but it is what it is. Anyways, this video is going to be talking about, of course, a very big fight upcoming this month. And for those of you that have been paying attention to that of the fight scene this month of July, not for those of you that only watch boxing, but MMA as well, and I watch both sports quite a lot. There's been a lot of great fights within that of MMA, and there's been a lot of great fights within that of boxing. Unfortunately, one of those fights between Virgil Ortiz and Stanionis got canceled. We'll see if that fight can possibly get remade for the fourth time a little bit later on. UFC, of course, there was a great card most recently between Volkanovski and Yair Rodriguez. And there's going to also be a great card on UFC 291 on the same day as this fight right here between Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. that I'm also probably going to be doing a fight prediction on because I know a lot of those fighters and it's a massive card, and in my view, you certainly can't miss it. But two of the fights that I'm probably most excited for this month are that of boxing fights, because when it comes to these two fights, it almost reminds me of that of a superhero film or a superhero matchup. Or for those of you that ever read comic books or anything like that, for those of you that ever grew up in the era like I did of the Marvel movies or the DC universe, well, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day, a great boxing match like this is almost like that of a great superhero matchup. Take Batman, for example, who, of course, is one of the more popular superheroes out there. Batman, of course, he has a lot of very interesting contenders that are always willing to try and challenge, his right to power. And basically over, the power over that of Gotham City. You have Killer Croc, Scarecrow, that of Two-Face, and a multitude of others. But there's always that one villain that always pushes Batman to his max lengths, both physically and mentally, and even sometimes spiritually. And that, of course, is the Joker. My point being is this, is that both Errol Spence and Terrence Bud Crawford, the reason why this fight is so intriguing is because these guys are finally going to get into the ring that they were meant to be in the ring with in the first place. They are finally meeting, their Batman to their Joker. They are finally meeting their Superman to their Lex Luthor, or their Spider-Man to their Green Goblin. They are basically meeting the counterpart of their career, and this is really going to dictate, this is going to be the main fight that everyone remembers, because a lot of people who, of course, have watched these fighters over the past several years knows that these guys are on a whole different level than most of the guys around them. They were on a different level, excuse me, than that of Sean Porter, than that of Keith Thurman, than that of Danny Garcia, and even Kilbrook, and a couple of others. So now it's finally time for these two to get in the ring. And Terrence Bud Crawford, especially in my view, this is really going to be a lot to prove for him as well, because Terrence Bud Crawford, by a lot of his fans, of course, they've claimed him to be the number one pound for pound fighter, the actual number one pound for pound fighter. And I understand it. Terrence Bud Crawford has, a belt in three separate weight divisions, or he's won in three separate weight divisions, including completely unifying the 140-pound weight division. But the problem that I've always had with Terrence Bud Crawford is not that he's not astronomically skilled. It's not that he's not very adaptable and mentally tough. And it's not that, he's not dominant. The problem is that he just does not have a lot of clear A-grade names on his resume. At the end of the day, there are certain fighters that don't have, the amount of fights that Terrence Bud Crawford has, and they already have more championship fights, like Vasily Lomachenko, and a certain amount of these channels especially, they love to criticize his record and say, oh, well, he was pound for pound when he doesn't even have 20 fights, right? But it's not necessarily about how many fights you have. It's about who you fought. And at the end of the day, Terrence Bud Crawford really in his career has only fought about 20, he's only really fought about 7 to 8 championship caliber level fighters, maybe 9 now ever since he fought Sean Porter. When you talk about Canelo Alvarez, I guarantee you he's fought at least probably 15 former or current champions whenever he fought them, if not even 20. Now of course he has 60 fights, but even Vasily Lomachenko, when you take a look at his record, he has 20 fights, I believe, on his resume. I guarantee you at least 12 of those fighters were either former champions or current champions when he fought them, when it came down to it. So, like I said, Terrence Bud Crawford, he's a great fighter, but this is going to be finally the fight that proves, is he truly in that debate as the number one pound for pound fighter, or maybe has it been, a little bit overstated? We'll see. And as for Errol Spence, we'll also see if he can maybe be in the debate as the number one pound for pound fighter, as well as Mr. Inoue, the Japanese monster, because he's another fighter. Even though I think he's a great fighter, a greatly talented fighter, he's also been someone that I've pushed back a little bit against because I also don't think that he has an A-grade level resume. And for you to be my number one pound for pound fighter, you do have to have an A-grade level resume. It just is what it is because there's too many talented fighters out there for you to be the number one pound for pound fighter, and the best fighter you've ever defeated was Sean Porter. Just my personal view of it. But anyways, Mr. Eagle is going to talk about it in this video. I just thought that it was very particularly interesting, and he's going to talk about mainly Errol Spence Jr. and what Terrence Bud Crawford fans have claimed, which is that Errol Spence is that of a basic fighter. And I thought that I would talk about that because, of course, in Terrence Bud Crawford's fans' minds, they basically believe that, or some of them may believe that Errol Spence is a quote-unquote basic fighter because he does not look overtly flashy in some of the areas. He doesn't have the fastest feet. He doesn't have the fastest head movement. He doesn't have the fastest hands. But one thing that Errol Spence Jr. does have is a great chin. He has great will, great heart at the end of the day. He does have high-level boxing IQ, and he has very ruthless power. So once again, this is going to be a very interesting fight for both fighters. It's going to prove a lot for that of both fighters. And I do truly believe that both fighters are going to get, a little bit of theirs in the ring. I have no doubt about it. I have a very hard time believing that one fighter is just going to be completely dominant over the other. Maybe if Errol Spence can hurt Terrence Bud Crawford early, or maybe if Terrence's feet is just too much for that of Errol Spence Jr., maybe. But overall, I see both fighters, kind of, getting theirs, but we'll overall end up seeing what ends up happening with that debate. But anyways, let's get straight into it. Let's see what he has to say.
Failing the class and getting straight F's. So it's like, what are we talking about? So back to the word basic. I just gave you the definition. Forming an essential foundation or starting point, fundamental. I've always told you Errol Spence is fundamentally sound. Errol Spence also has told you. He said, I'm like the Tim Duncan of boxing. He told you that. Tim Duncan, I think that's a great analogy. One, because he played in Texas with the San Antonio Spurs, and Errol is from Texas and represents Texas, but also because the Spurs...
Just to talk about that really quick, and I've had a couple of people ask me if I was going to do a video on the Tim Duncan versus Kobe Bryant conversation, or just a video on Tim Duncan in general. And that might come eventually once I get a little bit more into the basketball scene. Tim Duncan, by the way, is hands down the most underrated top 10 player of all time. I even did a video not too long ago where Max Kellerman, I believe, he had Tim Duncan at number 11. It's like, how do you have Tim Duncan at number 11? Tim Duncan was the best and the greatest player of the 2000s, or at least the greatest, hands down. A lot of people, of course, would debate Shaquille O'Neal, or they would debate that of Kobe Bryant. No, Tim Duncan was above both of those players. It is what it is. He won more MVPs than either of them. He won either the same amount of finals MVPs or more than either one of those players. He won more than Kobe Bryant for sure, and he won the same amount as Shaquille O'Neal. And he won 3 championships as the complete leader of his squad throughout that of the 2000s. Tim Duncan, also keep in mind, he led his team to the playoffs every single year. He did not miss the playoffs one single year. And a lot of people, of course, would say, well, that's partially because of Greg Popovich, and that's probably true. Greg is a great coach. But if we're really also going to talk about it, and no one seems to be mentioning it, how successful have the Spurs been really ever since, Tim Duncan left that team? They haven't even made one finals appearance, when it comes down to it. And I understand that that's a bit difficult considering that the Golden State Warriors were there a lot of the time when Tim Duncan kind of left. But there's even some years, I believe, they didn't even make the playoffs. So once again, Tim Duncan was really the main culture setter. Once again, hands down the most underrated player within the top 10 rankings, no doubt about it. And you have to have him top 10 of all time. In my view, Tim Duncan, just in my personal view, he's right there with LeBron James. He's right there with that of Larry Bird. He's right there with that of Will Chamberlain. And if you wanted to also put this player in the same category, that of Magic Johnson. Although Magic, in my view, he's probably about a half level above those guys, just by a little bit. But, Tim Duncan, very great player.
Spurs in general at the time, and definitely Tim Duncan. His level of gameplay was not all that flashy. But you know what he did? Tim Duncan got 5 rings, just like Kobe Bryant, rest in peace to the Black Mamba, just behind Michael Jordan, who is considered the GOAT. Him and Kobe are considered the GOAT. Kobe got 5, Tim Duncan got 5, Michael Jordan.
This also needs to be talked about, and I don't mean to digress that much here. No, Kobe Bryant is not the greatest player of all time, and it's really not even a debate. I've had a lot of people claim to me that they believe Kobe Bryant is a top 5 player of all time. Listen, you do you. Kobe Bryant is not really a top 5 player of all time. Kobe is a great player. Don't get it twisted. He is a great all-time great player. And I understand from the Kobe Bryant fans' perspective, it seems that he's getting disrespected a little bit more as history goes along, and I understand that. But when you talk about him on the same level as Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, even Larry Bird, Wilt Chamberlain, Shaquille O'Neal, Tim Duncan, those guys, he's not on those guys' level. It just is what it is. And Kobe's an all-time great player. But the thing in my view that really sets him back is his complete value, his total package, and also at times his inefficiency. A lot of people really don't know that Kobe Bryant, without that of Phil Jackson, that the best that he ever did in terms of playoff success was that he made it out of the first round one time. And that was against the Denver team, I believe, in 2012, that really didn't have anyone on it. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't blame it completely on Kobe. Of course, in the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, it was not an extraordinarily talented team. But once again, people must realize what some of these other top 10 players have done. Tim Duncan, when you take a look at some of the teams that he had to drag to the NBA Finals, like some of those teams, like a lot of people always say, like, oh, take a look at LeBron James. He dragged all these guys, all these bums to the NBA Finals. You want to take a look at a guy who actually dragged guys that didn't belong there to the finals? Take a look at some of those early runs by Tim Duncan. Don't get me wrong, sometimes they were talented, but there was a lot of times with an older David Robinson and I believe a newer Tony Parker, that was literally the only pieces that he had. Tim Duncan was able to lead them to a finals win in 2003. He was also able to get it in 2005 with a 7-game series win over the Detroit Pistons, who destroyed that of the LA Lakers and that of Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal. On top of that, once again, Tim Duncan won more MVPs than either Shaquille O'Neal or that of Kobe Bryant. And I know a lot of the Kobe Bryant fans say, oh, he deserved more MVPs. I'm not quite sure if you could 100% truly debate that, just in my view. And either way, Tim Duncan, when you also take a look at the ESPN's top 50 playoff performers list of all time, and I'm not always a big fan of the numbers, but if you wanted to use that, as an acclamation, Tim Duncan, I believe, is like number 3 of all time, only behind Michael Jordan and LeBron James.
Jordan MJ 2-3 got 6. So they're just behind.
And Kobe, once again, great player, but the thing that sets me back about him is that when you talk about his value as a player, once again, without Phil Jackson, he's only made it out of the first round one time. He just is what it is. When you talk about other players, for example, that are really that impactful, like Michael Jordan, almost no matter what coach he had, he gave pretty much every team hell. He was able to take the Boston Celtics. Yeah, he got swept 3-0, but he was able to take them to hell. But even if you don't want to count that, when Phil Jackson wasn't even there and he had no All-Stars, Michael Jordan was able to take the Detroit Pistons to 6 games. He was able to make the Eastern Conference Finals multiple times, I believe, even without that of Phil Jackson. On top of that, he also led the 72-win team, 6 Finals MVPs, blah, blah, blah. When you talk about Magic Johnson, not only did he win 5 NBA championships, but he was actually able to lead a team to the NBA Finals without Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, with that team being a little bit more aged or a little bit more wore down, and not having Pat Riley as a lead head coach. All right. I don't remember who their coach was. Maybe it was Mike Dunleavy. I can't remember. But he was able to lead them to the NBA Finals in 1991. Could Kobe do that without Phil Jackson? I highly doubt it. It just is what it is. When you talk about Larry Bird, he was able to take a 20-win team his first season into a 60-win team. When you talk about Tim Duncan, he never missed the playoffs. He brought some teams that did not belong in the finals to the finals, and he won them. On top of that, he won more MVPs, more finals MVPs. And even if we're going to talk about other players that are on the same level as Kobe, in my view, like Steph Curry and Hakeem Olajuwon, those guys are probably more impactful than Kobe Bryant as well. Steph Curry was able to win a championship last year in the 2022 season with basically, I don't want to say nobody, but Draymond Green was not the same player that he had been. He's been pretty much, very overrated in my view for the past few years. He's been almost more of a detriment than a help. Klay Thompson has not been the same player. Andrew Wiggins was their second best player, who really is not an all-star caliber player even last year in my view. Steph was able to win with that team against the number one defense, against Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and Marcus Smart, the defensive player of the year, and a multitude of others. On top of that, he was able to get a multitude of 67 win seasons or 65 win seasons and lead his team to a 73 win season. He was even able to take the 2014 San Antonio Spurs without that of Steve Kerr to 6 games. He gave them the hardest challenge that year. My point about Kobe Bryant is this. When you take a look at Kobe's resume, he doesn't have that type of level of impact and value. It just is what it is. And when you also count in his inefficiency at times, no, Kobe Bryant is not really on the same level as those players. Sorry. He's certainly, debatably a top 10 player. Top 5, no, not really that debatable.
And Tim Duncan and Kobe Bryant just behind the man considered to be the greatest player of all time.
And the only one who really thinks that Kobe Bryant is actually on the same level as Michael Jordan are only LA Lakers fans and Kobe Bryant fans. And BOXINGEGO is probably both because I believe he's in that California area. So more than likely, he's an LA Lakers fan.
I'm in Michael Jordan, right? That's not bad company to be in for Mr. Basic Tim Duncan, right? Versus, I'm going to keep it with hoops. Since we talking hoops, let the boy, basketball ego, let me talk a little hoops. So you have a quote-unquote basic Tim Duncan, but he basically got 5 ships, 5 rings, tied with Kobe, right? And let's say, look at a Vince Carter. Vince Carter got like...
Well, once again, if we're going to talk more about basketball, Kobe Bryant, in my view, really only has about 3 championships or 3.5 because he really only led his teams to 2 championships. Those first 3 championships were Shaquille O'Neal, period. Shaquille O'Neal, in my view, is also above Kobe Bryant, and I know a lot of the Kobe Bryant fans will say, oh, how could you say that? Because Shaquille O'Neal, he wouldn't win those rings without Kobe. Would Kobe, let me just pose you this question. Had Shaquille O'Neal never showed up to LA and had he went to another team, let's say had he been without a Dwayne Wade and Kobe Bryant, Phil Jackson would have never arrived there. How many championships does Kobe Bryant have? In fact, let's not even play that game because there's other players, other all-time great players that, they wouldn't have debatably won without great coaches. That's understandable. How many times would Kobe Bryant even have made the Western Conference Finals? How many times would he really have made the finals? Had Shaquille O'Neal never been there and Phil Jackson never returned, it's very possible that Kobe Bryant would be a 0-time NBA champion, or if he was an NBA champion, probably only a 1-time NBA champion. Kobe was very fortunate, in my view, to have Phil Jackson and Shaquille O'Neal when he did, and then eventually to get that place to winning. Don't get me wrong, he was still a brilliant player, but on the same level as those other players, no.
20-plus seasons in the league, in the NBA, and is literally one of the most, if not the most electrifying dunker of all times. But I ask you, how many rings does Vince Carter have? He has like 22 seasons in the NBA, which means he's been in the league a long time, like LeBron James, right? How many rings does Vince Carter have? 0, right? So despite the talent, and this is not to knock Vince Carter because I'm a fan, I'm just giving you an example. Vince Carter had a flashy style, and he's defying gravity with the most vicious dunks. He was all over Slam magazines, and his highlight reel is insane, right? You look at a Tim Duncan highlight reel, it's not gonna look like a Vince Carter highlight reel. Like when Vince Carter dunked over that 7-footer Vice and slammed it and posterized him, right? So again, it depends. What do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known for that? Dunk it over a 7'2" guy and vicious dunk contests and stuff like that? 0 rings though. Tim Duncan, basic, 5 rings. So I think this whole concept, and that's why I came back to my roots with the ego thoughts, because I really want to talk about these things. I think the whole concept that Errol is basic sounds pretty stupid to me, because that's what you would want. If you were a trainer.
Well, listen, from the perspective of the Terrence Bud Crawford fans, if Errol was truly that level of fighter, no, that isn't something that you want, because at the end of the day, and don't get me wrong, that's not me saying that you don't want a fighter that knows all the basics or that, doesn't know all the fundamentals. That's not what I'm saying. But what I mean is that when you have a fighter that, sure, they know a lot of the fundamentals, but they're not exceptional in any area, that fighter is never going to be an all-time great fighter. It just is what it is. To be an all-time great fighter, you have to usually be exceptional in a multitude of areas. Floyd Mayweather Jr., Manny Pacquiao, Tyson Fury, Andre Ward, Terrence Bud Crawford, Errol Spence Jr., all those fighters that I just listed, they're great in a multitude of areas. Most of the time, all-time great in a multitude of areas. What is Terrence Bud Crawford great in? He has excellent feet. He has excellent adaptability, very swift movement, great counter-punching ability, great adaptability, and great boxing IQ. What does Errol Spence Jr. have? He has a great amount of volume in his punches. He has very high-level boxing IQ. He also has good feet. They're just not extraordinarily fast. When it comes down to it, he's very defensively sharp. And on top of that, he has a very good chin. He has an A-grade level chin. And he has very, very atrocious power. Very good power.
And you got a guy like Errol Spence, who's always in position to punch, has power in both hands, has an excellent jab, has showed durability in the chin, keeps his...
He doesn't have quite the timing of the jab as what a Terrence Bud Crawford does, but it's going to be interesting to see how Terrence Bud Crawford reacts to that, because according to the statistics from what I heard, Errol Spence throws a decent amount more with that jab. Now, that can be a positive, or that could be a negative, because the more sometimes you throw a punch, the more sometimes you show your enemy how they're able to time you. So we'll see.
Guard tight, brings his hands back, has basic fundamentals, right? Works on his defense. Face doesn't look all lumped up at the end of the fight like Martin when he fought Tommy Hearns. These types of things. Goes to the head.
Tommy Hearns, once again, one of the more overrated fighters in boxing history. I really don't understand a lot of these lists that have Tommy Hearns in the top 10 of all time. I really don't get it. A lot of these guys like Dante, but of course, those guys, they're pretty much like, they pretty much round up every black fighter that they possibly can get, and then they just put them on the list. But even other lists that I see, like on ESPN or some other ones, like sometimes I legitimately see Tommy Hearns in the top 20 or top 10 conversation of all time. It's like, how? Like, it's no offense against Tommy Hearns, but what big fights did he ever win? Like, the biggest fight of his career that he ever won that I can remember is probably against that of Roberto Duran. And you should have won that fight because he outreached him by damn near 11 inches, or however long the reach was. I'm not sure. I'm just making it up. But at the end of the day, you're talking about a guy that went from 135 to fight you. You were decently taller and decently lengthier than him. You're supposed to win that fight. But every fight that, it was 50-50 against that of Sugar Ray Leonard. Now, to be fair, I also thought he won the second fight, but in the first fight, he blew it. And against Marvin Hagler, he blew it. And against Ron Barkley, I believe he blew it. So at the end of the day, Tommy Hearns, people need to stop talking about Tommy Hearns like he's this top 10, top 20 fighter of all time. He's on that same level, in my view, probably as Sugar Shane Mosley, Miguel Cotto, probably maybe slightly greater than those guys.
But doesn't headhunt and has a vicious body attack and mixes his attack. Went to the Olympics. I mean, this is like literally kind of the prototype of what you would want for a fighter. So I don't even understand the conversation. I must have missed something. I must have missed the memo. People keep saying, oh, but Errol's basic. He's basic. I mean, well, he's so basic that he went to the Olympics. He's so basic that when Floyd got out of jail after the Cotto fight and needed sparring, and there was this unknown kid from in the gym from DeSoto, Texas, and legend has it, that kid from Texas lumped Floyd's eye up, and TBE had a black eye fighting.
That's very true. And there's been certain stories on that. And to be fair, at least from my knowledge, I don't think I've ever heard Floyd turn down that story. So more than likely, it is very true that Errol Spence gave Floyd Mayweather Jr. a hell of a time. Which means that, Terrence Bud Crawford, he could be in for it in some of those rounds. But we'll see. Like I said, it's really a razor-thin fight, really, in both fights. Like I said, if they're, I'm known for getting my fights pretty damn accurate, with my fight predictions, especially in terms of that of boxing. But if there is two mega fights that I could potentially get wrong just because of how razor close they are in terms of truly the level of both fighters, it's going to be these next upcoming fights with that of Inoue and Fulton and Crawford and Spence, because both of these fights, it's like, who really do you pick?
Errol Spence. Legend has it that this basic guy hurt, possibly stopped Adrian Broner, who Maidana couldn't even stop. So to stop Broner, or at least that's what the legend is, that he really had Broner crying or something with headgear on. I mean, that goes to show you that it's like Errol Spence has to be real. But for some...
Well, hold on, Mr. Ego. Is is that overall because Broner was possibly already beat up by Maidana and a certain amount of these other guys? Once again, I don't mind that, but then when Boxing Ego was talking about Terrence Crawford stopping Sean Porter, he was saying that, oh, Sean wasn't the same and all sort of stuff. I don't agree with that. I just think he fought a fighter that had, certain more talents than Errol Spence in certain categories. Terrence Bud Crawford had the slightly better performance over Sean Porter. Does that mean he's going to win the fight over Errol Spence? No, because triangle theories and, that of quote-unquote fight math doesn't always work. But at the end of the day, it is something in Terrence Bud Crawford's corner.
Reason, the level of hate that Errol Spence gets, people somehow, some way cannot see this. They can't see this. They're saying, oh, but Errol's so basic. He's just a basic guy. I mean, again, in sports in general, if we're talking about basics, that's what you would want. You would want basic fundamentals. Like, imagine somebody who's insanely athletic. Like, we'll say boxing. Roy Jones is my favorite fighter, one of my favorite fighters. And he was insanely athletic. But what happens when the athleticism slows down? Guys can catch you. And then now, to this point, you've seen Roy Jones knocked out numerous times, right?
I agree with that, but a big part of the reason why is because Roy Jones Jr., he never really had an all-time great defense. Roy Jones Jr. was such a phenomenally gifted athlete. Like, Roy Jones Jr. is up with any athlete within the history that we've ever seen, at least within the past 200 years. I mean, Roy Jones is really phenomenal. He's up there with Wilt Chamberlain. He's up there with really anybody. He's truly just phenomenal. He was such a gifted athlete that he could pretty much keep his hands down throughout the whole entire boxing fight and really just completely whoop your ass. He was way too fast, way too powerful. He was somewhat lengthy, at least I believe, with a 76-inch reach. He was just so physically gifted. Like, Roy Jones is one of those guys like, Randy Moss or, one of these guys that they look like they were purposely created in a video game or a lab. Like, he was so physically talented. But, he used that physicality as his defense because he never had to work really on his defense because his physicality was so great. But once it started to wane, he started to get hit a little bit more because he never worked on it.
Versus if you have basic fundamentals, you typically have more longevity in the sport. Look at guys like Floyd Mayweather, Bernard Hopkins, guys like Juan Manuel Marquez. People don't remember this, but when Marquez knocked out Manny Pacquiao, I may want to sub to my promoter, I believe Marquez, right? When Marquez knocked out Pacquiao, he was right around 40. He was pushing 40. Look it up. Marquez, he was 39 years old in that fourth fight. But he had great experience with Pacquiao in the previous 3 fights. and he caught Pacquiao lacking. He knew the feint and the little setup with the stutter step that Pacquiao did, lined him up with that right hand. And this was in a point where Pacquiao was getting mad aggressive and looked like he could possibly be on the verge of stopping Marquez himself. But
Yeah, and he probably should have in that fight, but Manny Pacquiao, he got way too complacent. He went in there, and I think Pacquiao knew the possible punch that Marquez was going to throw. I just think that maybe he thought he could beat him to the punch, and he thought wrong. And Marquez, he finally took Manny Pacquiao in that fight. By the way, I also thought Manny Pacquiao won the majority of their fights. I thought that he won the second and the third fight. The fights with Manny Pacquiao that Dante and a lot of these other guys say doesn't count allegedly because they were quote unquote controversial. But Andre Ward and Sergey Kovalev, that counts, and all the fights that they want to count, they count.
beautiful timing and fundamentals and the ability to counterpunch is what won Marquez that particular fight at almost 40 years old. So I don't understand these concepts that I'm hearing about, oh, Errol is basic. I mean, who cares? If is basic. I mean, who cares? If we're using that, Tom Brady's basic, but he wins. He wins. Tom Brady, he's not a scrambling quarterback where he's.
Well, the thing is overall about the quote unquote basic theory when it comes down to it. You can't just be quote unquote basic when it comes down to it. And, once again, I'm talking about from the perspective of, they look all around good, but there's nothing super duper special about them. You can't be all around basic and be on the level of a Tim Duncan or a Tom Brady or some of these other guys. Now, we can say that Tom Brady, for example, that he's not the most talented quarterback that we've ever seen. But Tom Brady is a great in a multitude of categories. He has a great arm strength. A lot of people actually don't realize it, but Tom Brady, he can whip that ball down the field about 70 yards. People overall don't understand. I've seen Tom Brady, I believe, do a couple of throws, a couple of Hail Marys where it was about 70-something yards. Tom Brady actually has a very underrated, powerful arm. Now, once again, can he make the type of throws that Aaron Rodgers does or Patrick Mahomes does? Not quite, but he can make a lot of the same throws. He can make some very good throws. He's very decently accurate. He's very smart, and he knows how to play within his system. And no, he's not the biggest scrambling quarterback, but he's an excellent pocket passer. He's highly intelligent, and he knows how to read the defenses. Tim Duncan, great all-around player, both great offensive player and defensive player. He made a lot of defensive teams within that of the NBA. Once again, you can't be quote-unquote basic in terms of saying that, basically you're a bag of flour, or basically, you have no flair. It doesn't work like that. And it's the same thing with Errol Spence. Errol doesn't look as quick or as flashy as some other fighters, but where he is exceptional at is his tight defense the majority of the time, when he needs to be, unless he's in a brawl. He has an excellent chin, and he has bone-crushing power.
In the pocket, and he's going to run around.
And exceptional boxing IQ.
Like Russell Westbrook, like Deshaun, like Patrick Mahomes, like
I think you mean Russell Wilson, but I know what you're getting at.
Kaepernick, like, some of these other moving, mobile trade.
Kaepernick, who is a dude that, a lot of these guys like Dante's Boxing Nation, all these other dudes, a lot of these pro-blackities, on these channels, saying that Colin Kaepernick deserved the job in the NFL, even though he was hurting their bottom line. And on top of that, he was asked. Colin Kaepernick was never a good quarterback. Once overall that 1 year happened at the Super Bowl, he was never really the same again. I think he had one NFC Championship appearance after that in 2014 against the Seattle Seahawks. And then after that, he was completely done. Once that coach left, Jim Harbaugh, I believe, and some of the talent left, he literally had nothing. I mean, he was completely done after that. A lot of these guys, they don't even watch NFL football, and they were saying, how come Colin Kaepernick, is there really a guy out there that, isn't, that he can't start over? Colin Kaepernick was done as a quarterback. Not only was he hurting their bottom line in terms of his quote-unquote protest that he was doing when it comes down to it, but on top of that, he couldn't play for shit. People forget that, that last season on the 49ers with him, when it came down to it, that Colin Kaepernick, he was getting outplayed by Blaine Gabbert, a dude who once upon a time was a backup quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was getting outplayed by him.
You know what I mean? These mobile quarterbacks who can scramble a bit, right? These new
And Colin Kaepernick really isn't a isn't a great scrambler. He's another running quarterback that has horrible accuracy down the field if you really push him.
age, we'll say new age quarterbacks. That's not Tom Brady's game. He's an old school throwback, move the ball, can throw a deep ball, pause, and he's clutch when it matters under the bright
Yes, and that's another A grade category that Tom Brady has. He is extraordinarily mentally tough.
lights. He could be down in the fourth quarter.
And I'll say this, if we're talking about this fight, if there's one fighter that I believe is going to have the advantage in that category, adaptability, the ability to adapt on a dime, the ability to have a little bit more mental toughness later on down the fight, it is more than likely going to be Terrence Bud Crawford. So if you're Errol Spence Jr., more than likely you have to try to get at Terrence Bud Crawford early, and you're going to have to try to hurt him. You're going to have to really show him that you're not going to allow him, to box circles around you, and that you're going to be able to cut off the ring, and that you're going to be able to get to him. Because if not, Terrence Bud Crawford might take over the second half of the fight.
And him, Brett Favre, Peyton Manning, you don't want to get guys like that with fundamentals. You don't want to get the ball in their hands. Drew Brees, guys like that. Basic fundamentals. But like using Tom Brady, I think he's another example of somebody who he knows how. He's a prime quarterback. He's like the greatest quarterback of all time. And I'm a 49ers fan. So Niners have Steve Young and Joe Montana, who I really love. But
Joe Montana, by the way, the second greatest quarterback of all time, not Peyton Manning.
I'm not a hater, so I give Tom Brady his props. But he's executing basic quarterback moves and the ability to read plays and read the defense and move the ball. He's not like a wildcat scrambling quarterback at all. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't understand.
Right, but then that means that Tom Brady really isn't basic, because once again, to be basic, quote unquote, at least in that sort of word, you would have to say all in all that, it could mean a multitude of things. In Boxing Ego's perspective, I understand what he's trying to say, but from the quote unquote perspective, let's say if you're taking the Errol Spence, he doesn't have any flair perspective and that type of perspective, that wouldn't be true, because once again, he's exceptional in a multitude of categories, just like Tom Brady is.
Why people keep saying that dumb stuff when it comes to Errol Spence? It sounds really preposterous and it sounds foolish. Like, oh, he's just basic. He's basic. Him being basic got him all the way to the Olympics. Now, speaking of
I agree, and you cannot be a basic fighter and beat the fighters that he's beat, like Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, Kell Brook, and a couple of other ones, Mikey Garcia, Yordenis Ugas, especially in the fashion that he's usually beat them.
Olympics, there's another Olympian that got a bronze medal, and that's Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Oh my God, to this day, right? And here's the thing.
Now, Deontay Wilder, the reason why he lost his fight against Tyson Fury is because Deontay Wilder is not exceptional, usually in a multitude of categories. He's exceptional with his height and reach. He's also exceptional with his power, and he has some level of boxing IQ. But that's pretty much the only things that Deontay Wilder is exceptional in. That's why he got beat up so bad in those last two fights against Tyson Fury. Because Tyson Fury, as an all-around fighter, even though many people don't agree that, in my view, he's a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, at least debatably, Tyson Fury is exceptional in so many categories. I mean, there's really, when we talk about it, I'm not really sure if there's any category that Tyson Fury is not A grade in, other than maybe chin, but even there you could possibly debate it. Tyson Fury has A grade level head movement. He has A grade level defense for the heavyweight division. He has A grade level boxing IQ. He can fight on the inside. He can fight in mid range. He can fight on the back foot. When it comes down to it, he has decent feet. Sometimes they're a bit gangly in the early part of his career, but ever since the Kronk Gym, they got a bit better when it came down to it. That's why Tyson Fury, in my view, he is on that list. Tyson Fury now, the one area that I'd say maybe he's not A grade in is hand speed. And even there, you could debate it's A grade, but probably punching power. But even then, you'd probably give him anywhere from a B, B to A minus.
Boxing fans are so stupid and fickle that Wilder has his own style, for real, for real. Wilder is super awkward and unorthodox with killer power and killer instinct and, sniper reflexes, all that type of stuff. What are the same people who hate on PBC, who hate on black fighters, who hate on Al Heyman, who hate on Errol Spence? What do they say? They say stuff like, oh, Wilder, he needs to work on his boxing. He's not technical. He can't box. All he has is a right hand. All he has is power. So even if that's your true statement, you see Wilder, you say he lacks fundamentals, he lacks technical ability.
Well, he does lack fundamentals and a lot of technical ability. There really isn't any doubt about that for those of us that know boxing. He does not have good feet. A lot of the times he does not have a good stance. His punches a lot of the times are way too advertised. He does not have excellent defense. He's always had a very leaky defense. And it finally got exposed against Tyson Fury because I was really the only fighter who could handle him.
He lacks the ability to box. But then you see Errol Spence, and he's clearly the opposite of that. And you still hate on him and say he's too basic. Then you got a guy who's in between an Errol Spence and Wilder, like Gervonta Davis, who has an aggressive, explosive style. He has a lot of flash and pizzazz. He has crazy speed. But
Gervonta's a great fighter, extraordinarily talented. But one thing that I worry about him going forward is that sometimes he has to throw a little bit more volume with his punches. What I mean by that is that he has to throw a little bit more. Sometimes he relies way too much on one punch accuracy and looking for the knockout. I've seen him lose several rounds, within his past couple of fights, because he did not throw enough within those rounds. So sometimes he's got to stop going for the knockout.
He's more technical than, let's say, Wilder, but he got Wilder type of power, but he has Errol type of fundamentals, and old media hates on him too. So I just told you 3 separate fighters, all with Al Heyman, all black, all with PBC, and guess what? They have their own unique styles, and the same fans pick all of them apart. One guy's not technical enough. One guy's too basic and too fundamental, and it's not flashy enough. Then the guy that has a mixture of both, like a
Well, I somewhat agree with you, Mr. Boxing Ego, but once again, let's not cast stones when you live in a glass house. Once again, you pick a lot of the fighters apart that you don't like either.
Gervonta Davis, they hate him too, and wish bad on him and hope he goes to jail and all this type of stuff. Man, stop playing with me, bro. So I had to get that off my chest, this whole Errol's basic. Like, him being basic got Floyd raving about him, saying this kid could fight, and gave Floyd a black eye. Him being basic got him to the Olympics. That's why I don't understand it. And again, if you were, let's say you had a...
I would love to see Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s analyzation of this fight. I don't think that he's going to do that because Errol Spence, I think, is his guy. He's trained mainly in his gym. But I would love to see who he would personally predict to win this fight.
Be in charge of an Olympic boxing team or a boxing team that was going to enter some tournament. And if you win that, you win $50 million for the team. And you guys all split it or whatever. You would want guys like Errol Spence on the squad. So I don't understand how people's hatred for whatever can overshadow this. And it just goes to show you.
Well, it's very easy. Just think that he's Vasily Lomachenko or Tyson Fury. Then you can easily picture it.
That boxing fans are so fickle, they don't even know what they want. One guy's too...
Hey, what do I say about Boxing Ego all the time when he talks shit about Canelo Alvarez or one of these fighters? They don't even know what they want. I 100% agree with you.
Technical. One guy's too...
Because a hater truly never gives credit where it's due. They never truly know what they want. The standards always change.
Basic, and you want more. Errol Spence, like I said, he brings his hands home, jabs. Derek James is an amazing coach, and they still complain. It's like, what do you want? You just want to complain. That's what it is. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Ego thoughts, we unpacked.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it. I just thought that was interesting, but just to kind of give a last word, I understand what Ego was saying in terms of actually answering the question, what more do you want? Well, I think from the Terrence Bud Crawford's perspective, I think that more than likely they think, well, he's not as quick as Terrence Bud Crawford. He doesn't have the same kind of punching ability, or that he's not as quick. But sometimes you don't have to be as quick or as flashy as some of the other fighters. Errol Spence Jr., once again, he's not as quick, and sometimes speed it looks flashier when, than if you're a little bit slower. But timing beats speed, as they always say. Precision beats power. And timing beats speed, as Conor McGregor said. So we'll see. But anyways, that's pretty much about it. Once again, this is going to be a very hard fight to predict. I'm really going to have to watch some of their past fights and see who I'm going to personally go with. And even then, you don't truly know because, Terrence Bud Crawford, I believe he is 35 going on 36. So we'll see. But anyways, that's pretty much about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.